90% of everything alive on Earth died, not in a slow fade, not over millions of years. Geologically speaking, it happened in a blink. And if you were alive 252 million years ago, there was almost nowhere left to go. Almost. The event we're talking about is the Permian-Triassic extinction, also called the Great Dying, the largest extinction event in Earth's history, eliminating around 90% of all life on the planet. Every video you've probably seen about it tells you the same story. Volcanoes erupted in Siberia, the planet cooked, and almost everything died. That's true. But what almost nobody talks about is what came next. Which specific places on Earth actually let life survive? Why those places worked when everything else failed? And what the world looked like for the few creatures lucky enough to find them. Because here's the thing, most content gets wrong. There wasn't one safe place, there were several, and they were nothing like what you'd expect. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what made each of them work. And one of them is so counterintuitive, it's going to genuinely surprise you. But we'll get to that. First, let's actually feel the scale of what happened, because the numbers alone don't do it justice. The mass extinction at the end of the Permian, nearly 252 million years ago, was the most severe to affect life on Earth. Generic extinction rates exceeded 80%, with victims encountered in all environments from the open oceans to polar forests. Whatever happened during the Permian-Triassic period was far worse than the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Trees, plants, lizards, proto-mammals, insects, fish, mollusks, and microbes. All were nearly wiped out. And the cause? The contemporaneous eruption of the giant Siberian Traps Flood Basalt Province has long been the principal contender. Volcanism releases a diverse range of volatiles with potentially damaging effects on climate and life. Most notably sulfur, carbon dioxide, halogens, and water vapor. And most extinction scenarios involve the long-lasting effects of CO2 and its cascade of consequences. Warming, ocean stagnation, and acidification. So the oceans warmed, the atmosphere thickened, oxygen dropped, and the world that had existed for hundreds of millions of years just stopped. Now here's where it gets interesting, because in the middle of all of that, some things survived. And the story of how they survived, where they hid, what biology let them make it through, is the story almost nobody is telling correctly. Let's start with the ocean, because what happened underwater is genuinely one of the most underappreciated survival stories in the entire fossil record. When the surface ocean started heating up, it became lethally hot in the tropics. A study published in the journal Science reported a rise in temperature from 20 to 36 degrees in the ancient Tethys Ocean over an 800,000-year period. And a second rise in the early Triassic pushed temperatures past 40 degrees, a critical threshold for most marine organisms. The extreme temperatures at the equator forced organisms to higher latitudes, where conditions remained somewhat tolerable. But some creatures went the other direction, down. The cladodontomorphs, an ancient lineage of sharks, were able to survive the extinction by likely utilizing the deep oceans as specific zones of refugia, a hypothesis based on the discovery of early Cretaceous cladodontomorphs in deep outer shelf environments. Think about what that means. While the surface ocean was turning into something close to a hot, acidic soup, the deep ocean stayed cold, stayed dark, and stayed just survivable enough for one of the oldest shark lineages on the planet to hide in. You've probably heard that sharks are ancient survivors, and that's true. But the reason this particular group made it through is almost never mentioned. They didn't survive because they were tough. They survived because they went somewhere the extinction couldn't quite reach. In South China, the first phase of extinction saw many surviving foraminifers migrate to deeper waters as well. A trend reasonably interpreted as a response to avoid lethally hot surface waters. So the deep ocean wasn't just a shark refuge. It was functioning as a kind of pressure valve for anything that could get there. The problem, of course, is that most things couldn't, which brings us to the second safe zone. And this one requires you to completely flip your assumptions. If you had to guess which coastal environment was the safest during the worst extinction in Earth's history, you'd probably say something calm, sheltered, a quiet bay maybe, or a protected lagoon. You'd be wrong. Wave-dominated shore-face settings are believed to have served as refugium environments because they appear to have been unusually diverse in the mass extinction's aftermath. The coastlines that got hammered by constant churning wave action, the ones that looked the most exposed and the most dangerous, were actually among the safest real estate on the planet. Why? Because the constant wave energy kept those environments oxygenated. The rest of the shallow ocean was going anoxic, meaning the water was running out of oxygen, turning into dead zones where almost nothing could breathe. But high-energy shorelines kept getting churned. The water kept moving, the oxygen kept cycling. Complex ecosystem engineering managed to persist locally in some of these places and may have spread from there after harsh conditions across the global ocean were ameliorated over time. So the turbulent coastline, the one that looks like the last place you'd want to be, was actually the one holding the seeds of recovery. That's the extinction's great irony. The places that seemed the most exposed were the ones that stayed alive. Now I want to pause here and flag something, because we're about to get to the land. And the land tells a completely different story than the ocean. And buried in that story is something about the survivors that almost nobody frames correctly. Stick with me. On land, the extinction was just as catastrophic. The event led to the wholesale collapse of entire ecosystems as plankton and other producers disappeared. And on land, you could see it in the plants. Researchers have found elevated levels of fungal remains in Permo-Triassic rocks from all over the world, what they call a fungal spike. The same rocks yield almost no tree pollen grains. The conclusion, nearly all the world's trees died en masse. And the evidence didn't stop there. It got locked into the rock itself. Early Triassic coals are completely unknown anywhere on Earth, and the coal gap began with the extinction of peat-forming plants at the end of the Permian, with no coal found anywhere until the Middle Triassic, around 243 million years ago. Permian levels of plant diversity and peat thickness were not recovered until the late Triassic, around 230 million years ago. Let that sink in. For roughly 20 million years after the extinction, Earth couldn't make coal. The forests were so thoroughly destroyed that the planet's entire peat-forming system just stopped. You can look at a rock from the early Triassic and know, just from the absence of coal, that you're looking at a world that hadn't recovered yet. The extinction left a scar in stone that lasted for tens of millions of years. And the land plants that did begin to come back? The proto-recovery of terrestrial floras took place from a few tens of thousands of years after the end Permian extinction to around 350,000 years after it. That's a genuinely strange window. It's not the millions of years most content tells you. The earliest flicker of plant recovery happened relatively fast, but it was just a flicker. The forests themselves, gone for an almost incomprehensible stretch of time. So what was living on land during all of this? And this is where we get to the third safe zone, and the animal that became the face of the post-extinction world. Antarctica. Right now, when you picture a refuge, you probably don't picture the South Pole. But during the Permian-Triassic boundary, Antarctica was part of the supercontinent Pangaea, positioned at high latitude, and that polar position may have actually been protective. Antarctica may have served as a refuge for Dicynodonts during the extinction. The suggested ability of polar Antarctic Lystrosaurus to enter torpor, a hibernation-like state, has been put forward as a reason for its survival across the Permian-Triassic boundary, as Antarctica is thought to have served as a key refugium for animal species during this period, despite its harsh seasonality due to its polar latitude. Most videos about the Great Dying default to the Karoo Basin in South Africa as the go-to safe zone. And the Karoo is important. It's where we find some of the best fossil records of the transition. But Antarctica as a polar arc for an entire group of animals is a thread that almost never gets pulled on. And it matters because the animal that's sheltered there and spread from places like it became something almost unimaginable in the aftermath. Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized herbivorous dicynodont therapsid, constituted as much as 90% of some of the earliest Triassic land vertebrate fauna. 90%. One animal. On a planet that had just lost almost everything, this squat, tusked, beak-faced herbivore briefly became almost the only large land animal left alive. And the reason isn't usually explained correctly. Several attempts have been made to explain why Lystrosaurus survived and why it dominated early Triassic fauna to such an unprecedented extent. It has been suggested as a highly adaptable generalist with a flexible physiology able to tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions. And that generalist framing is the key. It was likely a generalist, meaning it wasn't specialized to eat any particular food, but could survive on a wide variety of plants. And that unpickiness was a key factor in its survival during difficult times. One of its most important adaptations was the ability to burrow underground to escape extreme temperatures and droughts. The evolutionary success of Lystrosaurus in the aftermath is believed to be attributable to its tolerance for extreme and highly variable climatic conditions, along with an extremely fast growth rate and early onset of sexual maturity. So it could eat almost anything, hide underground when conditions got unbearable, breed fast enough to rebuild a population quickly, and survive temperature swings that would have killed more specialized animals. Lystrosaurus fossils have been discovered in Antarctica, South Africa, India, and China, a widespread distribution that confirms it was a dominant species during the early Triassic period. This is what survival actually looked like. Not strength, not size. Cheap, flexible, generalist biology that could absorb chaos and keep going. And here's the thing. The survivors weren't just selected by where they lived. They were selected by how they were built at a fundamental level. Research on which groups made it through shows that organisms relying on more efficient oxygen transport systems, like hemoglobin or hemocyanin, fared disproportionately better than those depending on simpler systems under the low oxygen conditions the extinction created. The extinction was essentially a filter, and it was filtering by metabolic efficiency. The creatures that needed the least oxygen to function kept breathing when everything else couldn't. The flip side of that is the endemism story, and this one is genuinely underappreciated. Being specialized to one place, one region, one specific environment was a death sentence. Bivalves that were localized to a single area died out far more often than ones spread across multiple regions. So the safe place wasn't just about geography, it was about how many places you called home. A creature locked into one corner of the world had nowhere to go when that corner became uninhabitable. A creature spread across 10 regions had 9 fallbacks. Now we're almost at the last piece of this, and this is the one I promised at the start, the one that reframes everything. Because so far we've talked about the survivors, but there's a category nobody talks about, the creatures that technically survived the extinction and were functionally dead anyway. The Gorgonopsians, the dominant predators of the late Permian, a bizarre saber-toothed group, were thought to have died out along with most other life at the time, but scientists found that some survived into the Triassic. However, they didn't survive long, making them a dead clade walking. During the late Permian, saber-toothed Gorgonopsians were the dominant terrestrial predators. They were the apex of the Permian world, and then the extinction hit, and they were reduced to almost nothing. A single surviving genus, clinging on in tiny numbers. They were technically alive, but they had no future. The world they were built for was gone, and the new world had no room for them. That concept, surviving the event but not surviving history, is one of the most haunting ideas in all of paleontology. Because it means the extinction wasn't just a moment, it was a sentence. Some animals heard the verdict immediately. Others got a brief reprieve and then heard it anyway. The Gorgonopsians got the reprieve, and then they were gone. So let's pull all of this together, because the full picture here is something most extinction content never actually assembles. The Great Dying wasn't survived in one place. It was survived in pockets, specific environments where the conditions happened to stay just survivable enough. The deep ocean, cold and dark, sheltered ancient sharks that dove below the lethal heat of the surface. Wave-battered shorelines churning with oxygen kept marine ecosystems flickering when the calm, sheltered waters turned into dead zones. And at the poles, specifically in Antarctica, cold climate animals like Lystrosaurus may have found enough insulation from the worst of the warming to make it through, then spread across the world to fill the empty ecological space left behind. What connected all of these survivors wasn't toughness, it was flexibility. wide range, generalist diet, efficient biology, and the ability to function when the world stopped cooperating. The creatures that needed specific conditions, specific food, specific habitats, they didn't make it. The ones that could adapt to whatever was left did. And even for the survivors, the world they inherited was barely a world at all. Early Triassic coals are unknown. Middle Triassic coals are rare and thin, and the coal gap began with the extinction of peat-forming plants, with no coal found anywhere until around 243 million years ago, and Permian levels of plant diversity not returning until the late Triassic, around 230 million years ago. The forests were gone. The safe zones that existed couldn't rebuild full ecosystems for millions of years. The survivors made it through the door, but the house on the other side was empty. If you've made it this far and this kind of deep prehistory actually does something for you, drop a comment below. Tell me which of these safe zones surprised you the most: the deep ocean sharks, the wave-hammered coastlines, or the Antarctic polar arc. I genuinely want to know which one hit different. And if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, the video on what the actual Triassic world looked like for the creatures that made it through, the recovery period, the new predators, the world Lystrosaurus accidentally built, is right there waiting for you. The Great Dying wasn't the end of life on Earth. It was the end of one version of it, and what came next is, in a lot of ways, even stranger.